If I tell you right now, I'm going to ask you to please stop thinking about pink elephants. I want you to stop thinking about pink elephants. I bet I just made a whole bunch of people think about pink elephants.
Welcome back to the Menopause Anxiety Project. I'm your host, Holly Osterman. In our last episode, we took a deep dive into the world of the amygdala, that tiny but mighty part of your brain that plays a big role in anxiety. If you missed it, be sure to check out episode 1 before you go any further. Today, we're building on that foundation, and we're going to explore practical strategies to calm your anxious mind. Our guest, Catherine Pittman, Ph.D., will share insights on how our thoughts and imagination can fuel anxiety, and more importantly, how we can change the channel to find greater peace. But before we dive in, just a quick reminder. While the information in this series is incredibly valuable, it's not a substitute for professional medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider to discuss your unique symptoms and treatment options. Now, if you're ready to take control of your anxious thoughts and discover a new path to inner calm, you're in the right place. Let's join Catherine for another transformative conversation. Here's episode 2 of our 3-part series, Menopause and the Anxious Brain. So, Catherine, the last time we talked, you stressed the importance of getting to know your amygdala,
Yes.
right? And I had never heard of the amygdala before, didn't know what it was doing inside the brain and why it was causing people so many problems, especially women in menopause. But then you gave us a couple of quick little tips that we could try to calm the amygdala down. So we should breathe. And I did look up diaphragmatic breathing. I've been practicing that. I still can't get any sleep, but I've been making some adjustments, and then exercise.
Well, we may be coming back to sleep as we talk about worry, because worry is often one of the main reasons you don't get sleep. But we'll save that for another day, not today. For today, what I want to point out is we've had this time where we introduced the amygdala and explained how it's the part of our brain that creates our stress and anxiety. And then we talked a lot about how the amygdala works, but we did point out that the amygdala, there's one pathway directly to the amygdala, that very quick pathway where the amygdala sees things before you do and hears things before and can react to what it is processing. But there's another pathway, as if there weren't enough. You may remember, if you go back to this, that we talked about the fact that everything that you see and hear, you're not seeing with your eyes, you're not hearing with your ears. That information has to be taken to the right place in your brain for you to hear things and you to see things. You only hear things once your brain has processed it, your cortex has processed it, and you have access to it. So that's how the amygdala gets ahead of you, because it takes a little bit of time. The cortex needs to have some time to process all that visual information or auditory, even like the sensory information coming through. And the thalamus, it sends it 2 places. And the truth is, it's a little complicated, and we are going to show you a little visual of that might help you to understand how that works. But I'm going to be explaining them, and it could be a good time to take a look at that and see it. We have 2 different pathways. In one pathway, the information comes in through the sensory systems, goes to the thalamus, always goes to the thalamus first, and then the thalamus sends it to the amygdala. The amygdala processes it before your cortex. But also, the thalamus sends it to your cortex, and your cortex then allows you to see things, you to hear things, you to feel things. And the things that are going on in your cortex take a little longer for you to process because it's a longer pathway. And the amygdala is designed to react before you even are completely aware of exactly what's going on. So it gives it a little bit of a head start. But also, you might remember, this is review, the amygdala does not see as clearly as your cortex does. In other words, it gets a kind of a quick and dirty picture or a general sense of the sound, and it can misinterpret sounds and images that it's processing. But the good news is the amygdala also has access to what your cortex sees, so that if your amygdala sees a shape that looks close enough to a snake or a spider, it may react to that. But pretty soon, the other pathway, the cortex pathway, processes that same visual information. And the amygdala has the ability to kind of watch what's going on in the cortex, like watching cortex television. That cortex is processing the information. But one thing I can tell you the cortex cannot do, it cannot create stress or anxiety. Only the amygdala creates it. It has to have the right connections, you know? Like, for example, your car running, the engine makes the car move. Without that engine operating, things don't happen, right? Now, the cortex does not have access to running that engine, which is our stress response, that defense response. The cortex doesn't have access to turn that on itself. You know how it gets turned on. This is how you kind of have to think about it. The amygdala watches cortex television. And when the amygdala sees that, oh, that's not a snake, it's a stick, because the cortex sees that. The amygdala is watching what's going on in the cortex. Oh, it's a stick. It's not a snake. The amygdala would see what's going on in the cortex, and it would say, oh, it's a stick. That's not a snake. And then the amygdala would turn down that stress response. But I want to point out, and I think I did this before, it can't immediately click it off, because the way that stress response operates, it's the release of adrenaline, it's a change in blood pressure, it's all kinds of different things that have happened, muscle tension, and it doesn't just click off. So it takes a little while for you to calm down after you've reacted to something that looked like a snake to your amygdala. But the amygdala kind of resets things gradually. It's not an on or off switch, right? Now, here's what I want to say, though. The cortex, in a way, can cause us trouble. You know, it's important to remember that when we think about the cortex, it is looking at things, but it is not just helping us to see or hear or feel things. The cortex is also a source of memories and thoughts and imagination. We create images of things in our cortex. It can plan things. It can imagine the future. It can do all kinds of things in addition to the sensory stuff. And so in our right hemisphere, we create images so that if we hear a noise, it might be that we create an image in our brain of what could have made that noise. Yesterday, my wife and I were hearing a noise in the wall, and I was thinking, I think that's a squirrel. And she said, I think it's a raccoon. It's a big noise. We were both imagining what that sound made.
Either option
Not
would
great,
not
either
be
one.
great.
But the thing is, in your cortex, you can imagine something even though you can't see it, right? And that's our right hemisphere. Over here, Catherine. That's our right hemisphere. Now, we also have in our cortex things that we can do. We can anticipate things and we can worry. So if you've taken an exam before, you know, you can anticipate doing poorly on the exam. Or if you are having trouble reaching your partner on the phone, you can worry about things that might have gone wrong, right? And all of these things are going on in the cortex. And here's the thing. It's good that the cortex influences the amygdala in ways, and it's good that at times the cortex can let us know it's not a snake, it's a stick. But at other times, things are going on in the cortex that get the amygdala riled up for no good reason. Now, the cortex can't directly create stress itself. It can't say, you know, activate the sympathetic nervous system the way the amygdala can. But what it can do is it can be kind of presenting images or thoughts or interpretations of sound, like it's a raccoon, you know. It could be interpreting that, and those thoughts and images in your brain can activate the amygdala, even if there isn't even a raccoon anywhere within 5 miles. It can activate the amygdala.
Okay.
One thing we really have a problem with is we haven't really found a place in the brain where the amygdala has something that is helping it sort out the difference between thoughts about a raccoon in the wall and a raccoon in the wall, right? It seems like it may respond very similarly. So, the way the brain is organized, if you look at the way the brain's organized, there are a whole lot of connections from the amygdala up into the cortex, where the amygdala is watching, keeping an eye on what's going on. It can also affect the cortex. It can send information to the cortex like danger, run away, and kinds of things that lead the cortex to feel like, oh, I can feel there's a problem when the amygdala could be wrong. It has so many ways that it is interfering with and observing the cortex. On the other hand, if you try to count all the connections from the cortex down into the amygdalas that we have, not as many connections. And what that says is that we got this huge, amazing thinking brain that has been able to build skyscrapers and get little robots to walk around on Mars, but our brain cannot tell the amygdala settle down directly by just saying settle down. It doesn't have the influence, and that's why we're talking so much about the amygdala, so you can learn things about how to tame your amygdala, because it's not a matter of thinking at it or lecturing to it, you know?
Is it always on?
Oh my goodness, even when you're asleep, if there's a sound, the amygdala could respond to that sound. And you wake up. It really could be. There's sometimes I think that we are pretty much, kind of offline, but our amygdala is online for more of the times than you might think. It is still online. Here's the thing that we need to keep in mind. We have to understand that relationship between the amygdala and the cortex. And we have to keep in mind a couple of things. The amygdala watches cortex television, right? So what you think and what you imagine matters. You might think, what's wrong with me thinking about my partner might be cheating on me? Well, because you're going to scare the amygdala. That's what could happen. And do you have any evidence for this? So we have to think about that. Now, one of the things that I tell people, in addition to where the amygdala watches cortex television, is I say what happens in the cortex doesn't stay in the cortex. You might want to keep it in there as just a thought, a possibility, but it does have an effect on the amygdala, and it is going to react. And just in the same way we can't tell the amygdala to stop with our cortex any more than we can tell our eyes don't dilate, or tell our liver don't release enzymes. There's just lots of stuff going on automatically with the amygdala. Just have to recognize it's going to happen. And you need to understand these connections. So what I like to do is tell you an example of when the amygdala and the cortex are working together and illustrate how these operate in our brain. Okay, are you ready?
Okay.
Okay.
I'm
This is
ready.
a story about Charlotte and Frank. They're an older couple and they've been married for 47 years. And you know what? Frank likes to go fishing. And every year, Frank likes to go up to Canada and go fishing for a couple weeks. So he leaves Charlotte alone and he goes fishing. And Charlotte, she doesn't enjoy this too much, but she loves Frank and she knows he loves fishing, so she supports it, right? Well, one day when Frank is way up in Canada and she's in her house, she suddenly hears a noise, a sound. Now, I want to point out that this sound is a sound that is a very frequent sound in her house. And I'm actually going to tell you what that sound is, right? That sound that she hears is the sound of the door from the garage into the kitchen. There's a wooden door opening up as someone comes from the garage into the kitchen. And she hears that sound a lot. And it's a normal kind of house sound. Now, let me just ask, see if you've been keeping up with us here, Holly. Who's going to hear that sound first, the amygdala or the cortex?
The cortex is
Nope,
going to hear it
it's going to
first.
be the amygdala. That amygdala is so fast because remember that thalamus says, check this sound out. And also, I'm sending it to the cortex. You check it out too. But the amygdala hears that sound because it gets the sound quicker. And the amygdala is like, yeah, heard this sound before. This is a familiar sound. Not anything I've ever had a problem with. The amygdala does not see any reason to have a problem with it. Okay. Now, after the amygdala first gets that sound, after the amygdala gets the sound, then it's going on its pathway that the thalamus sent it on back to be processed up here, right above the ears in the temporal lobe, right? So then the cortex processes the sound, and the cortex not only processes it, it identifies it. It says, aha, door opening from the garage into the kitchen. And what the hell? Like, who is coming in? Frank is thousands of miles away. There should be no one opening that door. And as soon as the cortex hears, interprets, and starts thinking about that sound, then the cortex also starts to imagine maybe a thief, a robber, some dangerous person in the house. Now, once that thought gets into Charlotte's brain, the amygdala reacts to the thought and the images that are going through her brain. So at first the amygdala didn't react, but then it reacted. And here's the question I have for you. Would you say that was a good thing to be happening in the brain, or would you say that's not a good thing to be happening in the brain?
Okay, well, if we're being honest with each other, I'm always thinking somebody is going to be entering the house.
So you don't even need a sound sometime. You just imagine it just, oh, okay.
Right.
I'm starting to understand.
So yes, I guess it is a good thing because there's something about it that's not right. It went through the first gate. The amygdala said, I've heard the sound before, no big deal. But then the cortex is like, yeah, I hear the sound too, but Frank's not home.
And who could that be? And what could that sound? And see how it takes logic and analysis. I'm just telling you, the amygdala does not have that. The amygdala is like, does it look safe? Does it sound safe? Does it sound dangerous? Does it sound like it's good? That's the amygdala. It just values it. It assesses the significance of it. But the amygdala can't read. It can't be logical, It's going to not respond in some cases. And then the cortex, it brings to bear its increased awareness, interpretations, its logic. And here's what happens. Charlotte suddenly feels a rush of adrenaline. She gets really tense and she just gets the desire to run out of the house, and she runs right out her front door to the neighbor's house. And that is the fight or flight response. And the truth is that might have saved Charlotte's life. And that's why we have it, so it can protect us, right? But let's talk about that very same situation with Charlotte being home alone during Frank's vacation up in Canada. And let's say she's just lying in bed at night, and she's a little bit like you, maybe, Holly. She has a tendency to worry about things happening. And so here's what she does. She hears a scratching sound. And as she's listening to that, she thinks, what could that be? And what comes into her head is the idea of someone with an X-Acto knife cutting the screen in her bedroom so that they can climb in the screen and assault her. Now, what's going to happen with the amygdala?
It's going to go bonkers.
It's going to say, you need to get out of bed. You need to run away. You need to hide, or well, this is bad, And she's going to have this flood of adrenaline and sense of dread and fear, and her heart's going to be pounding. Her mouth's going to go dry. All that, the fight or flight response, the defense response. But in this case, you're like, Charlotte, seriously, X-Acto knife? What? Could that be the cat in the litter box? What? It could be something else. That seems like a far-fetched idea. But the truth is, the amygdala is saying, I don't think we feel safe, do we? And actually, now, if you think about it, now she's not feeling safe at all. And she may make a phone call. She may go hide in the bathroom and lock the door. She is not likely to be able to just settle herself down. Why? Because this is a very real feeling. I'm talking about a real feeling. I don't know who's really making that sound, but the feeling is real. Okay. And
Yes.
that's why you don't make fun of people who are feeling anxious for, quote, no good reason, because they don't have control over that process. The amygdala is set to do this defensive response, right? Okay. So now what we find here is your thoughts can scare the amygdala. And so we have to be a little bit better maybe sometimes at curating what kind of thoughts we just let wander through our mind, because once you present that image, once you flesh out those thoughts, and then if you feel scared, you have to remind yourself, I may just be feeling scared because I'm thinking scary thoughts. I'm scaring myself. Now, one part of you is scaring another part of you, right?
Right. And I spent the hour and a half before going to bed watching Dateline. And now I'm really
Right, because
freaking
it gave you
myself
even
out.
more things to put into your imagination about things, right? Now, but see, once we decode what is going on in our brain, and I think most people have no idea about what's going on in their brain like this, but once we interpret things and say, okay, there's these two pathways in my brain, and both of them can activate my amygdala. One is based on the amygdala's interpretation of things, and it can be helpful and it can be harmful. But the amygdala, we know, makes a lot of mistakes because it doesn't get the detailed sensory information, and it doesn't have the logic that the amygdala has to be able to, sort things out. And sometimes that helps us, and sometimes it hurts us that the amygdala doesn't have those things. But the truth is, if your cortex presents scary images or scary thoughts, your amygdala can react, even though it's just a thought or just an image, and you're not in danger. And it's going to feel the very same way it feels when you are in danger, when there is an actual threat. So, for example, I just want to be clear here, and those people who have done cognitive therapy is talking about the cortex and how what we think matters. So if I take an example of I'm walking my little dog down the street and we're heading out for a nice walk, but suddenly I see a fire truck and it's heading in the same direction back there where my house is. And I think to myself, did I leave the stove on? Did my curtains catch on fire? And I'm thinking my house could go up in a moment. No one's home right now. And as I start to think those thoughts are going to activate the amygdala. That means I'm going to start not just having thoughts, but now having a feeling of maybe panic or dread, or I'm going to feel like I need to go home. I can't continue this walk. The emotional feeling is it's not safe. I need to go back home to check. And that's because of partly the cortex and partly the amygdala. So let's kind of sort it out. Did the fire truck cause my amygdala to react? No, it wasn't a fire truck. It was the thought that my house was on fire that made my amygdala react. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Because the amygdala has
Oh,
heard the
yeah.
fire
The
truck
amygdala
before.
has seen fire trucks go by, and it's not necessarily really logical or whatever.
And also, if she were in the house and heard it, probably
No,
wouldn't have had
no,
the
no,
same
no, no,
reaction.
because I would be able to look around very readily, and just, but since I don't have access to that and I fill in the details with my imagination, which is a lovely thing that we've been given. I mean, we wouldn't be able to build skyscrapers or invent things, like custard and pies and just all the different things we've done with our imaginations. Awesome. But also it is just a danger to us because we can scare the heck out of ourselves. And I imagine you might realize this, the more creative, Holly, and the more intelligent you are, Holly, the more you could scare yourself. So, so if we interpret things in a certain way, it's our interpretation, our thinking processes that sometimes are our trouble, not the actual situation. Like if one of our young high school students is waiting for that all important answer back from college, am I going to get admitted to the colleges I want to go to? If a young man gets an envelope in the mailbox and he looks at it and it's from his very, very favorite college he's hoping to go to, friends are going there now. His mom went there, so she would be so proud. So he's just thinking, But then he looks at the envelope and he says, this is a really small little envelope here. I thought, if I were accepted, it'd be like a big manila envelope that had all my information in it. And so he suddenly gets a feeling that he hasn't been accepted. He interprets that envelope with his cortex, with his thinking process, in the way that this is a failure experience for me. This is a rejection envelope for me. Now, did the amygdala react to the envelope? The amygdala is not afraid of envelopes. The amygdala can't read, even what, the if it couldn't read the return address, it has no idea about this kind of stuff. But what it does see is him seeing his mom's sad, disappointed face and his friends leaving on their trip off to college while he's alone at home, and these kind of images that he's having and feeling like he's a failure, those kind of thoughts, I should say, not a feeling. Now the amygdala gets engaged, and the amygdala is very concerned about people's approval and people's anger and people being separated from us. That those are things the amygdala does not feel great about. That's scary. From the time we were little, we need our peeps, So the amygdala is going to, but you know what? Think about this. He may open up that envelope and it says he's got a full ride scholarship, right? He doesn't know what's in that envelope, but he's going through all this emotional turmoil because of the way our brain is organized. And once we understand more about how the brain's organized, then we can really work on saying, whoa, 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 don't get ahead of yourself here. You don't know what's in this envelope. Or why am I thinking about, or why am I watching this show? Or why, realizing that there's a process that we can observe in ourselves if we watch. Right? What we anticipate, what we imagine, how we interpret things, whether it's our friend frowning at us and we say, oh my God, she's mad at us. But the bottom line here, don't trust your cortex. Your cortex is capable of thinking of all kinds of terrible events that never happen. Your house burning down, getting rejected from a college, people disapproving of you, your partner cheating on you. Your cortex is completely capable of imagining all these things. But should you trust it? No, don't trust it, because your cortex is capable of imagining things that never happen. And I'm sure you could list a whole bunch of examples. And you can go over them and think about them. And what I talk about is I say, what channel are you on in your cortex? Some people are on the worry channel or the anxiety channel, and they are just on a channel of thinking that really stresses them out, stresses their amygdala out, and takes them right along with it. But
But
that's exactly right. You can change the channel. And one thing right now, your cortex is learning things. Your amygdala is not learning a damn thing right now, but your cortex is really learning some things. Your cortex is like, wait a minute. This information makes me see things somewhat differently. This information makes me think it does matter if I interpret no response to my text as my partner is dead. I mean, come on. That is just not the first thing your brain should be focused on, right? You're messing with things there. That is not a good plan. And so now that you know there's a good reason not to do it, especially considering that you've done it, hundreds of times and had very bad emotional reactions that you didn't even need to have because your partner was fine, right? So your cortex can be educated through reading and lectures and podcasts and your personal experience and observing other people and logic and all that. So we have a lot of ways we can teach the cortex, whereas we can't teach the amygdala through all of those different ways. And so what I really want to do is help you know that we can calm the amygdala down in certain ways, but we also have to make sure that we don't put the cortex in the position of being able to undo all the work we just went through. We're exercising, getting better sleep, we're deep breathing, but then we think scary thoughts. It undoes everything we're trying to do. Now, I'm not saying you can, always control this, but if you learn how to change your thinking processes, it can have a huge impact on your stress level. All right. So,
do you have a secret for us?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Remembering that the amygdala watches cortex television, change the channel, right? If you realize I'm starting to get anxious, ask yourself, is what I'm thinking about really the right thing to be focused on at this moment? Your thoughts just tumble down a really bad pathway that just, and the more smart you are and the more imagination you have, the better you can do this, worrying or stressing. So what we need to do, and it would be really mean if I just stated this, is just change the channel. But I'm going to tell you how the brain works. You can't turn off your cortex. I wish we could, because then you just be like, you're watching TV and people are upsetting you by what they're talking about, whether it's some kind of news or whether it's all fiction, but it's giving you more ideas about how you could be in danger in your house, various things like that. You can't turn it off. So when you say stop thinking, that is not going to happen. You can't just flip it off. But what you can do is you can replace those thoughts. And that's why I think the idea of changing the channel is a good metaphor for it, because you can replace those thoughts. I know all these thoughts that I could be having. Why don't I think about what I'm making for dinner? Why don't I go look in the refrigerator, what we have, what I'd like to eat? And why don't I just get my mind on something else? Because I have no proof for all these thoughts that are going through my head, and I'm stressing myself out, right? And the thing is, you have to replace, because you can't turn off, you can't erase thoughts. The way that our brain works, how do you make a thought? You actually are activating neurons in your brain. So right now, watch me do this with you. If I tell you right now, I'm going to ask you to please stop thinking about pink elephants. I want you to stop thinking about pink elephants. I bet I just made a whole bunch of people think about pink elephants. Because
Yes. They're hopping around all over the place.
oh my God, you're right. Right. I want to say you can't not activate neural circuitry by activating it. And as soon as I say pink elephant, you have activated certain circuitry that if you keep saying, stop thinking about an idea, don't focus on that. It doesn't help. You have to say, what are you going to focus on? And it could be anything. It could be doing a crossword puzzle. It could be going for a walk and looking at the flowers that are coming up. It could be playing with your dog. It could be calling someone, as long as you don't get on the phone and talk about, I think he's cheating on me. You got to change you say, what's going on in your life? Okay, my grandson's over. What is he doing? Put him on FaceTime. Let me see, things like that. So you need to get on a different channel. You see, you can't erase. You must replace. You can't erase.
That.
You must replace. So when you say, I need to get rid of this thought, just remind yourself, oh, my brain doesn't work that way. I have to replace it. And you have to know why you're doing that. It's not because the thought is dangerous. It's just you're stressing your amygdala out, right? And that's important for people to realize. The thoughts are not dangerous. If I'm thinking and worrying about my daughter, and her getting into a car accident, and that's why she's late for her curfew. If I'm thinking about that, it doesn't make it happen and it doesn't keep it from happening. But you know what it does? It stresses my amygdala out. That affects me. I'm all stressed out for no good reason, because I have no evidence that my daughter is in any kind of danger. So that's how you change in the moment. You have to replace, because you can't erase, right? Now, but how do you change your thoughts more permanently? And you might say, what? Why do I have to change thoughts permanently? What's wrong with that? Because some of you are thinking thoughts that are really stressing your amygdala out. Like, for example, some of you are thinking thoughts like, I'm feeling anxious, so there must be a reason for it. Absolutely not. There's no good reason. Maybe you could say the reason is the amygdala, but the amygdala, how many mistakes can it make, So we really need to be careful about the thoughts that we're having, and we need to realize what the rule is about how to make thoughts stronger and weaker in your brain. Would you like to do that? Like make some thoughts stronger and some thoughts weaker? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you could, if you want to do that, you have to remember that the law in the brain is the survival of the busiest. Survival of the
Oh,
busiest. That means the more you think a certain thought, the stronger you are making it. Those thoughts will get weaker and weaker if you don't think them. But every time you think them, you're making them stronger and stronger and stronger and more easily accessed. It's like they float to the top and you're always bumping into them, you know?
so if you're reading or you're doing I don't know, a craft
Mhm.
or a hobby
Sure.
that you really enjoy, you're going to be focused and all of those worrisome
Right.
thoughts aren't going to keep
Right. If
entering.
you do things with your brain, and it can be the dishes, I hate to say that because I don't necessarily enjoy it, but just focusing on the dishes and the way that you're feeling every dish and the suds and kind of get into it and look, feeling for any little thing you have to clean off and put things it, and that's where your mind is. Or if you turn on the television and you watch something, maybe a history channel and something going on, or something about on gardening, or something that is focusing you on something non-amygdala activating, right? Non-amygdala activating. But also sometimes we really want to take a thought you've been thinking and replace it with a healthier thought, a coping thought. So we even try to help you sometimes because we know some of the thoughts that people have. Like there are some people who are pessimists. They just tend to, their brain goes to
Mhm.
think the worst. And some people think it's good. They're like, if I think the worst, I'm going to be prepared. I got to prepare myself for the worst. But actually, now if you think about it, you say, wait a minute, it kind of backfires on me because I lived through a lot of stress because of my, I'm presenting a lot of ideas to my amygdala that
That are
never
probably
happened.
never going
Right.
to happen.
So
Yeah.
so those are things that we need to help people with. And so we have something to help people kind of identify what kind of thoughts might be. I have a little survey you can take that helps you look for anxiety igniting thoughts that would catch your amygdala's attention. And they kind of fall into different categories like pessimism, like trying to think of the worst that could happen, have a tendency to think if something can go wrong, it will go wrong, trying to, in any situation, coming up with potential problems that could occur as if that's the best way to approach it. Um, Also, there's worry, and we're going to spend a whole section on worry next time. So let me tell you that. But worry
Yes.
is when you're thinking of negative outcomes that could occur. And sometimes you just keep thinking of different, oh, this could happen, that could go wrong, or this could, there's catastrophizing where you don't just worry, you have to think of the a catastrophe. So
Yeah.
it's never just maybe she had a car problem, it's she's dead on the side of the road. That's catastrophizing, right?
Right. Right.
Right.
Or, it's been really windy and rainy and it's not going to end there. I'm sure
I
there's a
know.
tornado
I
coming through the
know.
neighborhood
Like
at any
more things
moment.
are coming. This is just the beginning of it, right? And then also when you might not have thought of perfectionism, when you need to have yourself or things always be perfect, that is setting you up for disappointment and even fear of doing things less than perfect, which is a decent fear since we all do things less than perfect, right? And you should be afraid because you're human, not perfect, right? So you're not going to always be perfect. And perfectionism kind of sets you up to be disappointed in yourself, be worried about your performance, be never satisfied, always trying to put more pressure on yourself, that kind of thing. So,
Right.
guilt and shame, obsessive thinking, there's all kinds of things we do. The bottom line is if you're interested, there's a little, just a little handout of some brief surveys you can take to see which of these is most likely to be something that you contend with in your life.
Yes. Yes. And you did share in the surveys with me. And I definitely think that's something that if anybody is interested, we can include in the
Mhm.
show notes or get,
Right. However you want to do that. And the other thing that we try to do as therapists is we know that when you've spent your whole life thinking something, like always do your best, always, and parents say this to the kids. I think we should stop saying this to their kids. I try not to say to my kids, always do your best, because I feel like if you try from the moment you get up till the end of the day, before you even hit noon, you're exhausted. If you get out, get out of bed your best and make your bed your best and have the best breakfast and, you know, dress your best, look your best. I mean, it's just too much. And we don't realize what we're saying. So trying to say, you need to decide your priorities and put effort into things and explain why something is important to try hard on, something may not be as important, and help. We all have to have priorities. We can't always be the best at everything. And so one thing we try to tell people to remember to tell yourself, no one is perfect. No one's perfect. And remind yourself, I'm trying to be human, not perfect, because that's who I am, And you don't have to be easy on yourself and everything. You can have high expectations, but it's just knowing to say to yourself, not everything needs to be perfect. A lot of times people look back at their life and say, I just put too much emphasis on this and I should have focused more on that. But we get messages ingrained in us or something like reminding yourself when you're feeling like it feels like something's going to go wrong, something's going to go wrong. Remind yourself just a simple statement. This feeling's been wrong before. This feeling has been wrong before. And it's wrong a lot. I live with this feeling sometimes that things are bad. You just say, this is just a feeling. This is a feeling. It doesn't mean that the future is going to turn out a certain way. Another thing, here's a good one for women in general, I think. Pleasing everyone is impossible. Because I think so many times we're caregivers and concerned about keeping people happy and cared for that sometimes we don't care for ourselves. So trying to realize what messages you tell yourself that could activate the amygdala and what thoughts and interpretations you're having of situations. Realizing this is another way that the amygdala gets activated. The second pathway through the cortex, which the amygdala is watching. So the amygdala gets activated because of it watching what's happening in the cortex. And the only thing we can do is try to change that channel, recognize we're causing ourselves some stress by thinking the way that we do. And I'm not saying it's easier. It's easy. I'm not saying it's easy to change your thoughts. It isn't like I just click my fingers and I think a new way. It takes practice. But survival of the busiest, the more you do it, the more you catch yourself saying, hey, I'm thinking nobody's perfect. I'm trying to, tell myself it's okay that you don't do this perfectly every time. So today I'm going to let that be. That's good enough. Good enough is good enough, right? And so you start to feel that those thoughts with practice get stronger and stronger. And that when you don't pay attention to certain thoughts and you stay off that channel, it gets weaker and weaker. One of my clients said, I just can't believe this. I can't. She said, she had a worry that she didn't believe she'd ever be able to let go of. And so I asked her, okay, let me just ask you this. Did you learn a language in high school? She said, yeah, 2 years of Spanish. I said, okay, so speak Spanish to me. And she said, I haven't been using it. And so I said, exactly. And so if you stop using those thoughts, they get weaker. They get weaker. And she agreed. She said, I'm gonna kind of put them in part of my brain and pull a curtain. How's that? I said, good, whatever it takes, just do it, But you can't just tell yourself not to think about them. You have to say, what am I going to think about? What am I going to think about? What am I going to do? And you know what? It really can improve your life because you start to realize you have some time when you can do some fun things. You can literally get on your phone and play a solitaire game. And it's good for you just to do something fun just for a little while. And then you're like, okay, I've kind of gotten myself reoriented. Now, what do I need to do? Oh, gonna make supper now. You just get yourself off the channel. And knowing how your brain works is so empowering to know you can do things. Now I'm saying thoughts are not the easiest thing to change, but once that amygdala is activated, that is tough to reset. You're just going to have to, take a little bit of time for it to reset. So what we're trying to do is say, don't activate it. If it's calm, leave it calm. Don't stir it up with putting yourself on the worry channel.
Well, what's that one thing people always say, don't wake a sleeping baby?
Let it sleep. Sometimes it's just there, chilling out. Don't wake it up. Yeah. Don't wave something in front of it like, look at this scary thought. Huh? What? One of my clients, who's just a young guy, I asked him, he was thinking scary thoughts at school. He had been bullied and he went to high school. No bullying was happening, but he told me he'd be very stressed in his class. So I said, what's going on in your head that you're stressing? And he said, you know what I do? I look at all the kids in my class and I think of how they might pick on me. Think that girl might make fun of my hair. Think that guy might make fun of my backpack, And I said, would you show your little sister a scary movie? He said, no. I said, well, that's what you're doing to your amygdala. You're showing your amygdala scary movies. I'm on a channel I don't need to be on. It's not good for me. And I can feel in my body, I've already got the amygdala's attention. That's going to be the first thing when you catch yourself having thoughts that have activated your amygdala. Then you got to give your amygdala a little time to chill out because it won't click off immediately. Go for a walk, because that settles the amygdala down. Say, what else can I do? Deep breathing. But sometimes just call a friend and let them tell you a story about their grandkids or whatever, And it really is but you've got to know it's okay to walk away from scary thoughts. Some people feel like, but I need to look at these scary thoughts. I say, not necessarily, not necessarily. And see, that's what we can talk about next time. What do you do when you worry? Because I will agree that worry has some positive aspects to it, but we're going to sort out what's the danger of worry and what's the benefit of worry. And then we're going to try to correct this problem that's happened in all of our lives. That's the problem that no one gave us the instruction manual for our brain. We're going to try to figure out what would be the correct way to worry. That's going to be our next mission to accomplish.
Perfect. Well, then let's give ourselves a little bit of homework for today. And when that amygdala passes something over, don't feed it to the cortex and get it all wound up.
That's right. That's right.
We're going to change the channel. Oh, and what was that? You can't erase.
You can't erase. Replace. You must replace. Exactly. So you can't just tell the thought, go away. You have to shove it out of your brain and put something in its place. You can't erase. You have to replace it. Okay, now I'm going to think that.
That is definitely going to give us something to focus on. And then also look forward to next time when we will figure out our worry.
Okay, looking forward to it. And don't worry about it. It's going to be fine.
In our next episode, Catherine and I are going to take an even deeper look at how our thinking can either fuel or calm our anxiety. We'll talk about the worry cycle and how to break free from those patterns that keep us stuck. So if you found value in today's conversation and don't want to miss out on more insights, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you're ready to take your journey to the next level and connect with a community of women who truly understand what you're going through, I invite you to join us at joinempart.com. It's a safe, supportive space where you can learn, grow, and thrive together. Until next time, remember, you have the power to change the channel on anxiety. Keep practicing those strategies, be gentle with yourself, and know that you're never alone on this journey.
All these changes happening that are very real, but it could be completely wrong. We talked about the idea that there could be a little swirl of hair in your shower and you could jump out of that bathtub because the amygdala saw what looked close to like a spider. And it can cause you to react, cause you to feel all kinds of things.